Somewhere on the coast of Egypt, over 2,000 years ago, there stood a building that held more knowledge than anywhere else on Earth. Hundreds of thousands of scrolls, centuries of mathematics, astronomy, medicine, philosophy, and engineering, all gathered under one roof. Then it burned. But what if it hadn't? To understand what we're really asking, we have to understand what was actually inside. The Library of Alexandria wasn't just a building full of books. It was closer to a research institution, what some historians call the world's first true center for organized science. Scholars there weren't just preserving old knowledge, they were producing new knowledge at a scale the ancient world had never seen. Eratosthenes calculated the circumference of the Earth using nothing but shadows and geometry, and got remarkably close to the real number. Euclid organized the foundations of geometry that students still learn today. Herophilus performed some of the first documented human dissections, mapping the nervous system centuries before Europe would attempt anything similar. This wasn't myth. This was methodology. And when the library was lost, not in one dramatic fire, most historians now agree, but through a slow series of fires, funding collapses, and neglect spanning centuries, that momentum didn't just pause, it broke. Now picture a different timeline. Julius Caesar's fire in 48 BCE doesn't reach the main collection. The funding never fully dries up. Successive rulers, Roman, then Byzantine, see the library not as a relic, but as a strategic asset worth protecting. The scrolls survive, and more importantly, the habit survives. The habit of one generation building directly on the last, instead of rediscovering it from ashes. Let's follow this forward, one field at a time. Astronomy first. Alexandria's astronomers were already tracking planetary motion and eclipses with real precision. With centuries of uninterrupted data instead of a gap of over 1,000 years, the math needed to properly model the solar system could plausibly arrive far earlier. Some historians speculate a heliocentric model, floated by Aristarchus of Samos in the 3rd century BCE and then largely ignored, might have been taken seriously centuries before Copernicus. Medicine next. Herophilus and his contemporaries were already identifying the brain, not the heart, as the seat of the nervous system. If that anatomical tradition continues uninterrupted, later physicians build directly on real observation instead of relying on second-hand, often mistaken texts for the next 1,000 years. Surgery, pharmacology, and public health don't restart from folklore. They compound. Engineering and mathematics. Alexandria produced Hero, who built early steam-powered devices, simple but real working models of pressure and mechanical motion. In our timeline, these were treated as clever toys. In this one, with continuous institutional support and centuries more iteration, it's not unreasonable to imagine mechanical engineering taking a meaningfully different trajectory, long before the Industrial Revolution as we know it. But knowledge alone doesn't move civilization forward. It needs a place to live. And this is where Alexandria's role becomes even bigger. The city sat at a crossroads. Greek, Egyptian, Persian, Jewish, and later Roman thought all passed through it. In our timeline, when the library declined, that convergence scattered. Knowledge fragmented into isolated regional pockets, some preserved by monasteries, some by Islamic scholars in Baghdad's House of Wisdom centuries later, some lost outright. In this alternate timeline, Alexandria remains the connective tissue. Instead of knowledge traveling in fragments, passed hand to hand across centuries and translations, there's a continuous hub where it's debated, cross-referenced, and refined in real time. The famous transmission of Greek philosophy through Islamic scholars, and later back into Europe during the Renaissance, might not need to happen at all, because the original thread was never cut. Here's where we have to be careful. It's tempting to say the Dark Ages never happen. But historians increasingly push back on the idea that the early medieval period was uniformly dark to begin with. It's a term that's fallen out of favor for a reason. What we can say more confidently is this: the collapse of Western Rome, plagues, and the fragmentation of trade networks were driven by far more than a single library. Political and economic forces, not just knowledge loss, reshaped Europe. But even accounting for that, a surviving Alexandria likely changes the texture of those centuries. Byzantine and Islamic centers of learning, which historically preserved and expanded on Greek knowledge, specifically because the Western tradition had fractured, might look completely different. Richer, or perhaps less necessary, because the original source never needed rescuing in the first place. Push this forward far enough, and things like the printing press, the scientific revolution, and the age of exploration don't necessarily arrive on the same timeline we know. They might arrive earlier. They might look nothing alike. Small shifts this far back tend to compound in ways that are almost impossible to predict with any real precision. It's worth being honest here. This is speculation built on top of history, not history itself. Knowledge doesn't automatically produce progress. Wars still happen. Plagues still spread. Empires still rise and collapse for reasons that have nothing to do with how many scrolls survive in one city. Some historians would even argue the library's importance has been romanticized over time, that its practical day-to-day impact on the ancient world was smaller than its symbolic legacy suggests today. But symbols matter too. And few events in history function as such a clean dividing line. A single physical point where an entire timeline could have bent in a different direction. The Library of Alexandria didn't survive. The fires, the funding, the neglect, over centuries, they won. But for just a moment, imagine if they hadn't. Imagine a world where humanity's greatest ideas were never lost, only ever built upon. We'll never know exactly what that world would look like, but it's worth wondering.